I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Are you ready to win at the game of life? Well, throw out that rulebook and get down to the business of being the best and most authentic version of you. Welcome to the Human Design Podcast. We're changing the rules around success, abundance, purpose, love, and life, where we're creating a planet where everyone can thrive in a world that loves and supports each other. I'm your host, Emma Dunwoody, a qualified master coach, human design expert, podcaster, and entrepreneur that is living the life of my dreams, breaking all the rules while doing it, making a huge impact, and living my design and manifesting miracles on the daily. Join me as I break down and simplify everything you need to live in alignment with your human design, teach you how to recondition your unconscious mind for greatness, and to take back your power so you can manifest your heaven on earth and serve the rest of the planet at the same time. It's time to give up the fear and step into your highest potential, to reach for the stars, to know and live your greatness. It's what you deserve, and it's what the planet really needs from you. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. Let's talk about the FLFE, or Focused Life Force Energy. I've been in love with this service since 2019, and I attribute a lot of my improved performance in all areas of my life since then to this incredible service. Right after I first put the FLFE on my home, my business took off. And to be honest, my kids actually started getting along better than they had in a really long time. But back to the business. I actually launched my first mastermind the first week of lockdown, with great success when many were struggling. Last year, when I was walking the Camino, I noticed that my body was a lot stronger and fitter, and I'd gone without the joint pain that I'd actually experienced 4 years earlier when I walked it for the first time. And I honestly believe it's being in the FLFE for the last 4 years that's helped my body over that time rest and recover and build muscle and strength. And as I've navigated a number of significant challenges over the last 4 years, like losing both my parents, the end of a 24-year marriage, and building a 7-figure business, I often hear from friends how amazed they are by how quickly I move through challenge, how quickly I get to a place of love, releasing the pain, the trauma, and the conditioning much faster than many. And I know that I get to letting go and love much faster than I used to. The FLFE raises the consciousness of a building or a place or device that it's connected to, meaning that everything and everyone in the vicinity of this higher consciousness field accesses more love, healing, success, and joy than when you were swimming around in the standard collective consciousness. This gives you access to greater inspiration, ideas, thinking, healing, dimensions, grace, and all sorts of good things. To top this all off, the FLFE mitigates EMF. It actually transforms the harmful non-native EMF frequency into good, healing, and protective frequency of shungite. My dog Alice cannot get enough of my phone ever since I switched it on, often sleeping with her head directly on it. Jeffrey and Clayton, the founders and creators of this service, are on a mission to raise consciousness and to get their incredible service to as many people as possible. And so it is very affordable, and you can try it for free for 2 weeks with no obligation. And if you like it, then you can sign up. Check out the links in the show notes and turn your home and office into a temple. Hey everyone, and welcome to today's episode. Well, today I have one of the incredible members of my team who I would have to say is one of the greatest contributors to the success in this business. And I am super pumped to share her with you. So Amanda Foley, my incredible PR, I call you my PR director. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm pumped. I'm so pumped to talk about PR. For the listeners out there, Amanda is a 4-6 sacral generator, cross of the Maya. And we were just having this conversation. I always ask people that have the cross, like incarnation cross of people close to me, like, what does it mean to you? So I can kind of get to understand those people close to me better. And my dad was the cross of the Maya. And what you just said, it's like you need to be in the matrix, like in the Maya, to be able to see through it. I'm like, oh, that's so good. So such gold. Okay. So we're going to talk about all things PR. We're actually going to talk about PR through the frame of human design. But before we do, I really want to, ask you that question that I ask so many people. And that is like, I'd love to hear the story of, that dark night of the soul, that moment where you were like, nah, I'm not doing this anymore. And you started on the journey to become the version of Amanda that is sitting in front of me today. And tell us a little bit about that journey to get to where you are today.
Yeah. And as a 6 line and one that's not far from coming down off the roof, I've had 2 dark nights of the soul. And, I think back, really going back 25 years to the year I turned 30, I had been working in corporate pharmaceutical PR, doing product public relations for about 10 years for some of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies. And, like on paper, it looked amazing and it was very lucrative. And, I was just on this track, but something just never really felt right to me. And I literally would be like afraid going to work every single day, yet people would see things in me. And I just had this really rapid trajectory, which just never felt comfortable.
Oh my God, I have to jump in. You were afraid. Yeah. Like, tell me about that. What do you mean by that?
I would literally be scared to go into work every single day, and I think, I know now, knowing so much of what I know, that it just didn't light me up. Like, I wasn't really driven by the work itself. I feel lucky to have started in pharma and at least found something like PR that, felt somewhat aligned with what I would maybe want to do. But I can't even explain it, but just for some reason I would go in and I never felt good. It just never felt good. And I had some health conditions start to pop up around that time. I was diagnosed with an underactive thyroid, and you start to look back and see all of these things, but it never felt good. And right around when I turned 30, I was working for, again, another big pharmaceutical company for this awful person. I hate to say that but really, he just made my life a living hell, and pretty much anyone, especially women that worked for him. And I don't tend to usually pull that card, but it was very, very clear in this case. And, I'd been married for 9 years. We're trying to have a baby. There was just all of these things. And I think I knew somewhere inside of me that that was never going to happen until I got myself out of this situation. But, it's scary. And you're like, I'm going to give up this, I'm young, I'm making all this money, and my career looks so good on paper. And that year, about halfway through my Saturn return, one of my best friends was killed in a car accident. And, there's nothing that makes you take a step back at that age, especially. And with something that sudden, she had a child, she was actually pregnant at the time. And I remember George just saying to me, what are you doing? You're so unhappy. Why you don't have to be doing this? But, the cognitive dissonance is real. And you're like, I can't leave this job. People will think I'm crazy. What will I do? I have to start over again.
Yeah.
And
I think that, I just want to quickly jump in, because I think there's a lot of people out there that potentially have that stress. I had it in advertising as well. I was so aware that I had backed myself into a corner because I was paid so well. I was really good at what I did. It looked great on paper, but I was in burnout. I was 24. Who cares how much money I had?
Right. It's not making you happy. Yes. Yeah. Or I was spending money on things just to, kind of make myself feel better for having to, to do that. And, I just was in a very fourth line fashion, I had met a woman at the last company I worked with, and she ran the PR agency that worked for me. So I was essentially their client, and her whole agency was made up of independent consultants, but they operated she did this virtual thing 25 years ago before it was even a thing. She's very, very cool. And she became a really good friend. How good would it be to know
her design?
Oh yeah. I can show it to you one of these days. Cool. I've looked at her chart. It's very, very interesting. And she, she had said to me, I remember just talking to her on the phone, and she's like, well, if you ever want to come work for me, I'd love to have you. And in my mind, I'm like, go into the service side. That's taking a step. But you're like, Oh God.
Yes.
I mean, but it
I
was
remember
tempting,
that.
right? So the mind is telling me like, oh no, you can never do that. But, you know, not knowing that at the time, my sacral's like screaming like, yes, like you would love to go work for Laura. Like this would be the greatest thing for you. And, you know, I don't remember how long I thought about it, but I just remember not long after that conversation, something happened, and I can't even believe that I did this to this day, because it's like I'm a Capricorn. It's like very much, well, I guess it kind of is like me, but also not. I quit my job on the spot. I literally walked in, like I'd gotten my breakfast. It was sitting on my desk. Something happened and I didn't say a word, but I took, with the time we had Blackberries, I took my Blackberry and my laptop. It was like back in 2006. And I walked down to HR and I was like, I cannot work here for one more second. And I'm leaving here today. I left a bonus on the table, 6-figure salary, you know, and but I remember driving away from there and being like, I have never felt so fucking free in my life. And it was probably like the most sacral thing I've ever done in my life. And looking
something
back, it's like
external to respond to quit.
Yes.
I love it.
It was, you know, it's so fun to like look back at it now, but it was the scariest thing ever. And I just like literally took the leap. And then I did that for 17 years. So I worked as a consultant for 17 years. You know, and that was great too, because for most of it, I had so much freedom. I could kind of choose, like, never worked full time. I actually made more money working less. And it was fantastic. And then the last 5 years of that, I ended up taking on this huge client, which was, again, like I was making more money because I was working more. I mean, it was like insane what was going on. I launched like one of the biggest drugs to come out in, you know, however long. And it was kind of like all right around the time of COVID. And so in the middle of that, I also started like questioning the media, questioning healthcare, and like, you know, all these things. And here I am in like my late 30s or late 40s at this point, you know, getting ready to head off the roof. And I'm like, this is just not right. And I don't want to be here anymore. I don't think, and again, no judgment to anybody else, but for me, I was like, I just don't share the same ideals with a lot of these, you know, folks anymore, people that were like my family, like my really good friends. But I had this awful, again, like an awful client. And I kicked ass. I ran this huge team, biggest account for the agency. And at one point they were acquired. Like, so I knew I was unhappy. I ended up with melanoma on my back, like all of these things, you know, like start to in burnout again. And they were acquired by a bigger pharmaceutical company. So it was like overnight they were gone. And it was like, do I move on to another project or do I take a break? And I remember Laura calling me and saying, you know, this woman that had given me this amazing opportunity 17 years before, and literally is like one, you know, a great friend to me and a mentor. And I remember being so scared, but I was like, I think I'm going to take time off. And that was scary, right? Like, so walking away again, like from the money, from, you know, would my role still, would there still be space for me when I wanted to come back? But I just knew I knew I had to do it. And that was a real dark night at the soul for me, because I spent probably a good 3 weeks, like really agonizing over it. I remember we went away to this beautiful lake out in Western Pennsylvania. And I remember just like sitting by the lake and like meditating and crying. It still like brings up emotion in me, like as a non-emotional now, thinking about that. And I was like, I have to do this. It makes no sense. I have no plan. The last time I had a plan, this time I have no plan. I don't know if I ever going to go back. And I did. So in the fall of 2021, I took almost a year, like that year off, like the end of 2021 and most of 2022. And I just like started seeking. I had found human design probably in like 2019, but never dug into it. But I spent that whole year just like studying the tarot with Liz and, you know, like playing with pendulums and you name it. Akashic Records, I tried everything. And it was probably like the most wonderful year of my life. I have all these hobbies that I picked up. I became like this really proficient crocheter. I became which as an Australian, you'll think it's funny. I became a pistol instructor. I learned how to shoot, like things that were so outside of my norm. But I just, you know, and it's very, my son is in the 61. And when you listen to the Gene Keys audio contemplation, Richard Rudd talks so much about pulling into going to creativity to like find those answers. And it really did give me the realization, because I had met all these people and they were like, oh, PR is so interesting. And I was ready to just toss it out. And I started to see that there was an opportunity for me in this space to actually do PR in a way. And I was like, I just didn't think that existed. And when I started to see that it did, I was like, okay, I'll teach these people how to do PR. And then at one point I did a reading with you, and Unpack with you. And I remember you saying to me, well, would you do PR for me? And I'm like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to teach people how to do PR. And, you know, then a couple of months later, I remember you reaching out to me and asking me more formally, and my sacral was like, yes, I want to do this. And so, I it was out of my comfort zone, but it felt very aligned. And I was like, I'm just going to do this. And so I then started doing PR for You, which is like one of the most amazing things that's like happened to me along this journey. And I kept that pharma consulting just a tiny bit. Like I went back to that just enough to give me that stability and bridge. And then probably like about a year after I started working with you, I started to take on more clients. And I realized this is what I want to do. And so now I get to do it in a like really fun, intuitive way. I don't have to follow anybody else's rules. I get to work with people like you and my other amazing clients that don't, they just have this trust that I think just doesn't exist in corporate. So, I mean, sorry, that was very long, but I just think it's interesting to me in hindsight, looking back, just to see like how I healed spiritually, physically, like so many things shifted just by me trusting and following my strategy and authority.
And I think like that's bang on. Like I remember doing your unpack and you telling me about this and you're like, no, I'm going to teach it. And I just said to you outright, I'm like, well, I'm not interested in doing a course. I have no interest whatsoever. So if you want to ever come and work with me, let me know. And you were so adamant, no. And then we were like, this PR thing, I just knew. I knew that you were our person. So I was really surprised that when I mentioned it to you later, like a couple of months later, that you were just like on it straight away. I'm like, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised because the sacral response, but I was like, yeah, right. Okay. And like this business, I mean, I am not the leading human design specialist or expert on the planet, but bloody hell, babe, because of you, I look like it in so many circles. And this is, I think, I often say to people, like Amanda is my second largest investment in the business after Taylor. And so many people have come to me like, do you think that PR is actually a thing? Like, does it actually work? And, one of the things that I've learned is number one, and you've already touched on it, like I put no pressure on you. I'm like, this is where I'd like to be. I mean, T and I were just talking about it yesterday about the way I manifest. And one day I just threw out there, I'm like, I want to be on Gaia. And you get me on Gaia. Like, I want to be on Luke Story's podcast, and you get me on Luke Story's podcast. Like with Luke Story's podcast, the kind of background of that is that I've had a kind of like a relationship with his wife, with Alice and Charles, for years. And that I just didn't want to ask her. Something in me was like, yeah, you know what? I just don't. And you really respected that. You didn't put any pressure on me to go, come on, Emma, just do it. That's the easy road. And everything that we have done, we have just trusted the process. And it's like, we're now at the point where we're like, Bruce Lipton, baby, who else can we get? So it's been so incredibly magical working with you, because it's like between the three of us, because you, Taylor, and I work really closely together, it's almost like there's nothing we can't do. The thing I do want to just pop on the end of that is one thing I've learnt about PR is that, and because a lot of people come to me and say, well, you talk about PR and how powerful it is, but it hasn't been that powerful for me. And one of the things that we are really good at is that you do your job really well, and then we do our job really well. So once you get us on the platform, you get, us in the publication, you get the interview for me or whatever, then we work that. Like, we make sure we're directing people back to us. We make it, we make sure that we can convert your magic into dollars. And I think that this is where some people misunderstand PR. Like advertising is about making money. PR is about building a brand. You're the expert. Do you want to talk about this more?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many threads there that I could pull on. The first thing I just want to say too is that, and I did touch on this piece before too, is that you are so patient. And the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that PR is a long game. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And if you're going to invest in PR to have somebody do it for you, it's not inexpensive because there's a lot of work and thought that goes into it. So some people would be like, I'm paying X amount of dollars for this podcast if I'm getting this much per month. But I think what you don't see, it's like the iceberg. You don't see what's beneath the surface to be able to to put those pieces of the puzzle together to show that host why they want to have you on, especially as you get to the bigger shows.
Yeah.
And like you said too, if someone is going to invest in having somebody do PR for them, you need to have all of those pieces of the business in place, because if you don't, PR is not really designed to sell. And I think that's a big misperception that is out there as well. People think, I'm going to go on this podcast and I'm going to book, 20 sessions off of it. And that can happen. It doesn't mean that that doesn't ever happen. But really what PR is intended to do is to create a warm audience for you to sell to. So the more people I push to you, the more people then you have, like you said, to convert into the business in some way or to work with you. And I think, I think sometimes people want one piece without the other. And I think if you're investing in PR, you should really be investing in your business as a whole. And I think that's really important for people to know.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, and we can talk about this, I know we want to talk about this, people can also do PR for themselves too. And there are really easy ways to get started they don't require a big investment either. And so I think it's really just knowing where you are in that stage of business. And I like you've talked a lot about this. Like I loved the conversation you had with Nikki and Nikki's courses and the classes in HDX. And she touches on this a lot too. It's like knowing where you are and knowing what's appropriate at that stage too.
Yeah, I love all of that. I think one of the things that is, yes, patience. And one of my principles is like the counterintuitive response is most often the best, right? And you said straight from the outset, be patient, be patient, be patient. I got to be honest, I didn't feel like I had to be patient. Like I feel like things converted really, really relatively quickly. Now I'm not talking like in a month, but I was like, oh, I'm sweet. Like this is a long game. Let's just sit back. And I think one of the most powerful things, and I've already touched on this, is that if you look at my audience compared to the International Human Design School, or you look at it to Karen Curry Parker or Jenna Zoe, their audience is much bigger than my audience. However, I'm the one, like Luke's story said to me, I usually get the people who created the thing, but you seemed like the most experienced person to get on. Like that is the power of PR, so when you can be patient, it's about building the brand. And the other piece that I want to say is having a really clear intention. Like, what is your intention? And I actually have a quote. Maybe I can find it because I didn't realize this would come up. I have this quote that I have on my Evernote, which reminds me of what my intention for the whole business was. No, I've moved it. But it's basically like I've had this intention the whole time that I don't want to be Ra. I don't want to be Karen. I don't want to be Jenna. I don't want to be the International Human Design School. I want to be the person that spreads it. Like, so our mission, our intention is to take human design mainstream. So we've always had a very, very clear intention of the direction that we want to go in with the PR.
Yeah. And I think that intention is so important too. And I think, when I start to look at it, even just how all of our designs work together, because with your line 5, I mean, you are meant to be the person that gets out there with the powerful voice to share it. For me, like that line 4 is so key to this, because even when, like you mentioned, getting you on Luke, that was someone I pitched them many, many times. Right. And it's really tough to get through to some of these bigger shows. And what happened, this is why it requires patience, because all of these pieces magically fell together because we had booked you on The Way Forward, also in Austin. Alec and Luke are friends. That was the perfect opportunity for me to go back and say, hey, listen, Emma's going to be in Austin this week. We're meeting with your friend, she's recording with your friend Alec that week. And once they saw, and again, it's like, for me, it's just this puzzle that shifts around every single day. And it's like, where am I in the puzzle? What piece can I grab down and pull? And that's what I mean when I say like what's beneath the iceberg that you don't see. It's, you could be the biggest name in the world or have all the contacts. Like, I know people that are very well connected with really big names they can't get on their shows. So people will say PR is all about who you know and the relationships, but I think that's a misperception. It is about relationships, but it's about building relationships based on mutual value. And I think if you can see it in that way, it's very different than just, you don't call in favors. Now, sometimes that happens, but it's, there's a lot of competition out there. And so for me, it's like, how can I deliver the most value to the show? And you make that very easy for me because you really make this practical for people. And I think, without that, it's a lot harder when someone's out there kind of talking about it in a little bit more of a nebulous way, but you bring it down to earth so well. And so I just think it's the perfect storm of us all coming together and using what we've got. And, and having that strong intention behind it, because you've always known what you've wanted. And I'm not the most patient person. But you can see we've had to ladder up to that. I mean, that's not where we started, right? No. But just 2 years later, which is not really that long in the grand scheme of things, knowing what you aim to build, we've really done it. I mean, I'm so proud of what we've done. And I don't mean that even to pat myself on the back, because we've done it together.
But you do need to pat yourself on the back because we have, and we have done it together. Exactly. Right. Thank you. And I think, the other thing that I want to say to people is, we're talking about the big wins that we've had recently. I have been up at 2 a.m. to be on TV in the US. Like, I have done interviews. I've done things at all sorts of crazy hours. I've done back-to-back podcasts. Like, I've done the work to get to this point. And I think that's something that in many cases, especially early on in startup, people don't realize that you do have to just show up. You have to do the things that you don't want to do. In fact, I have one of my own personal principles, and one of my dearest friends who's growing a business, I shared this with her about 2 months ago. And one of my most, that I've built my business, but I build my life on, is this principle that if there is something that I'm so resistant to, then I have to do it. Like, I have to do it. I don't care if it's the right thing or the wrong thing, or it's correct, or my authority said whatever. The fact that I have a huge resistance to it, then I'm doing it anyway. And I said that to her. I said, I did all the things I didn't want to do in my business. And once I ticked off all the things I didn't want to do and I just did them and I owned them and I learned them, who turned up? Taylor. So, I said this to my friend, and she did it, and because she was letting her partner do all the back end stuff for her business, and she basically said, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to learn. I'm going to do it all myself. All of a sudden, things started to really shift and take off. So I think it's the same. Like, whatever area and of your life, I've actually got a cool one that I will share with you all later. But there's a certain other thing going on in my life that I was really resisting. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. And as I'm sharing this actually with Heather Ivany, I'm like, oh shit, I hear myself. I got to go do that thing. So I think that's the other piece, to understand that when you invest in people or learning or yourself, you got to follow it up with the action. You got to follow it up with doing the do and being available and doing the hard thing that's correct for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's hard even as someone that, if you would have said to me, I never worked as much on this side of the media relations side as I have now that in the role that I perform now in my business. And I mean, it's really a lot like sales in a way. And if you would have said to me, you'd be doing sales, I'd be like, hell no, never. I mean, because, you do and to your point, exactly, it makes me so uncomfortable to ask people for anything. And so it's, we do learn to stretch ourselves in ways, and the win is that much sweeter, I think, sometimes when you're doing something that feels really out of your comfort zone.
Oh, I so agree. I so agree. So let's talk about, you have taught in the past, and you do have resources and people that you can send people to. But I'd love to start talking a little bit about how people can do their own PR and through the frame of human design. So can we, is there, depending on type, let's say, can we start there? Is there a different way that you would go about PR dependent on what type someone is?
Yeah. I mean, type is probably the most important. So obviously with everything, it's the most important way to look at it. But I think in some ways, with PR especially, can feel a little bit limiting, just because, you're having to do outreach. And so that's going to, for some people, feel very outside of their comfort zone, just based on the fact that they're some sort of generator or a projector, right? But I think what it's important to know is that, when you're ready to get out there, you know the value that you provide, right? And so like I think that's a number one, is understanding what you want to share, because our stories are so important, and that's why I love podcasts so much. And I think that's like really a great place for people to start, because there's so much opportunity out there. But you have to make sure you're always tying it back to your audience too. And that's why, like, regardless of type, you're always going to be offering something or making something visible. And I think that's the piece that, you can't think of it necessarily as like, oh, I'm a projector, I can't go out there and just, tell people this, because it's not just even sharing your story. It's like, here's what I've done. Here's what I've learned. You're giving information that's going to draw people to you. And there's, like, you could look at it from how you reach out. So for example, even for me, I mean, I'm reaching out all the time, and I'm a generator. And so what I do is when I pitch, I'm always in response in some way. So even though they're not coming to me, I'm like, oh my goodness, like I always go to their social media and see what they've been talking about. I go listen to an episode, read an article, and I never start an email that doesn't say, oh, I just listened to this episode and loved it so much, I took this away. So like, I'm always in response when I pitch. And that's a good practice for anybody, just because it shows someone that you really, I get the pitches for your show. And so, you should see some of the stuff that comes through. Like if I could help every one of these people, and some of them are PR people, I'm like, if I had the time, I'd be like, you could just do this instead. And it would be so, such better luck getting people to respond to you. But I think if you can just always remember to be, show people you understand who you're pitching, and that you've looked at the show, and being in response. So for manifestors, or manifesting generators and generators, it's just like, I would never start an email without something like that at the top. And also like, make sure the show lights you up, make sure the things you want to talk about light you up, like, don't be like, I'm going to pitch the show because it looks good on paper, but I really don't like this topic. I just want to be on this particular show. It has to be something that's going to be exciting to you to have. Make sure you like the host. It could be like really flat, and that's like reflectors. That's very important too, is feeling into that show and making sure that that's an environment you want to put yourself into. Like projectors, I tell them to be really careful with their language. And so not like, I want to come on your show and talk about this. It's always like, I saw such and such, and I would love if you would, if you're interested, I'd love to share more about X, Y, or Z. So it's like very nuanced. It's just literally softening your language, that you're not asking. You're basically like creating space for an invitation from the podcast or the host or whatever. Manifestors, I'm kind of like, everything's fair game. So my friend who I'll talk about, who offers an amazing do-it-yourself course that I would recommend to anybody who wants to learn more, especially those line ones out there that want to learn more before they just dive in. She's a manifestor, and I'm like, she is the best digital PR person, because they're the hardest pieces to get, because you're kind of like trying to hit things at a perfect time. There's so much less space. So like a podcast, they'd be like, oh, that's interesting, I'm going to cover it. A digital outlet, or, like a magazine, they're tied to what their editors want to talk about. They could already be working on an article. It's like, how do you fit yourself into it? You're doing it blindly. She has this amazing knack. And I swear it's, because she's really good at what she does, but I also think her manifestor energy really allows her to just tell them like something, and they're like, that's a great idea, I'm going to write about that. So she just has this knack. And so manifestors, I'm kind of like, pitch the biggest show. Yeah. What do you, where's your urge? Like, what do you feel called to do? And I just, like, they're very lucky in that sense. And then I think they get a lot of leeway to go and just be like, fuck it, I'm going to go, pitch whoever. And I think,
sorry to cut you off. Like,
no,
it always makes me think of Jess Barbaco, because I feel like there are so many humans in my life because of Jess Barbaco, and she's one of the only podcast pitches, like cold pitches, that I ever responded to and went, yep, I'll do it. And this is long before you.
She does. I help her all the time. She and I talk like literally every single day, multiple times throughout the day over Voxer. And she'll be like, oh, I saw this and quoted, like, as we get these emails that have opportunities, and I'm like, do it. And she does. They come to her, and I'm like, it is so cool to see. And it doesn't mean anybody can't do that. So I don't mean to say like, if you're not a manifestor, don't swing big, because you still can swing big. But I just think it's like, one of those things where it's neat to see just how magical they can be in that. And I think, and when they have the urge too, like it has to be based on, their urge.
Exactly. And I think I just want to touch base on the whole manifesting generator, like what you said, like, don't just pitch a show because it's the show that you think you should be on. I think
Yeah.
that's why we've had so much success, because I am lit up by everything that I do, and I love having conversations. And I don't think there's probably been one or two interviews that I've done that I was like, wow, that was just a waste of time. But everything else, I'm like, oh my God, these are amazing. You know, I've really loved it. And I think it's because I just hold that frequency of being lit up and excited by it. And I'm so sure that's why things inevitably drop in. And I think one of the other things, just again on the patience piece, is there's been a couple of times where we've had some big pitches and you'll be like, oh no, they directly said no. And you know who one of them was I'm pretty sure it was Elise Lunan. And I was like, don't worry, we'll get her. And, you know, then eventually, like, through this relationship that you've created, yes, I got her on my podcast. So that was really great. And now we're going to do something together with her. So I'm like, see, I knew
just saw
we'd
it
get
in her
there.
newsletter today. She announced it. Well, you know what? And that's like, again, like I have to always be, and it's not that I necessarily am like spending 24 hours a day looking at things, but I have to trust where, as a generator, where my energy is leading me.
Yes.
And so I am on her newsletter list and I was like, oh, she's doing a tarot workshop. Well, why wouldn't she do a human design workshop? So maybe, you know, she had Chitan Parkin on her show, but I'm like, here's another opportunity. She has a huge list. And so the fact that now we can put you in front of her audience that way, then maybe that leads to something else too. So I think it's like, to me, it's just always connecting those dots and looking for the opportunities too, to be in response. And that's exactly, you know, I said, I'm like, I saw you're doing a tarot workshop. How about a human design one with Emma? You know, you met her last year and all you can do is ask, and that's it. And there's a lot of no in PR too. I think that's just important for people to know. There's way more no than there is yes. And so you have to just not take it personally and you have to be persistent. And so I think that's like just a really important thing for people to realize. If they're, you know, reaching out, you're probably going to, it's like honestly like I don't know, like an 80-20, yes, no, or nothing, or like you don't hear anything. And so, you know, that's definitely a little bit of a hurdle for people, but I would say just don't let it discourage you because there's so much opportunity out there.
And I really, really believe that if you are following your strategy and authority, if you trust the journey, like there's been, as I said, there's been no's that I'm like, I know that's a yes. I know that that's going to happen. And Luke's story was one of them, you know, like
it just wasn't time. It wasn't the right time, right? Like that's
and
literally
we talk a
all
lot about that, don't we? You know, like one of the things that I have, one of the things that I constantly reflect on, and I will say to you and T, if we get a no, I'm like, well, obviously I'm not the host I need to be yet. Like as I get better, then, or I need to evolve, or I've like, there's been so many times where I have, you know, we've wanted a guest, it's taken ages. And then I have this experience the week before I interview them that I'm like, oh, well, shit, obviously that's why it had to wait all that time, because I wouldn't have listened to that podcast or had that experience or whatever that was completely unrelated, or I thought it was, but it was actually directly related. So it's also really trusting the divine timing process.
Yeah. I have the 15 as my vocation too. And so like, for me, it's so much about just being in flow and like carry, you know, I spent so much of my life trying to drive and force everything. And just, I mean, everywhere in my chart is like, trust the flow of the universe, trust the timing. And the more I do that, sometimes I feel like, I mean, my defined ajna never stops. So like, I'm always thinking, you know, which in a good way, like I have it under control now in a way that I didn't before. But I do not force anything. Like if something is just like, I can't make myself do it, I realize it's not time for it yet. And then it will just be like, bam, and it's time. And then everything feels so much easier that way with like so much less effort, which I think is, you know, really great. I mean, and the Gene Keys are another thing too, where, and Jess Budlow and I have done courses on this before too. And in the strategy sessions that I offer for people, we look at places in the Gene Keys too that really align with your messaging, like very specifically. And I find that if you infuse those things into your pitches, which I mean, and all the people listening to this know their charts really well or want to, I just really feel like your frequency speaks so much louder than anything you say. And if you have those themes woven in what you want to share, I think there's, you know, like the things that are aligned for you are almost never gonna, you know, be a no.
Yeah, I love that. Because I know that, you know, my design is everywhere in my brand. And, you know, one of the things that we know as a team, like all I got to do is get in front of someone. Like that's all I got to do, and then we can build a relationship because my 37 just kicks in, and they're like, "Oh my god, I feel like we've been friends forever." So, what I would love to know from your experience is if someone's listening and they want to do their own PR. We've talked a little bit about type, but what are the other areas? Like if you say like, look at your chart and infuse the things into your messaging. So what specific areas would you look at? Is it your personality sun? Is it your vocations or your design Jupiter? Design Mars? Like what is it?
So for me personally, so I actually do have a report on my website that includes type, and it goes over strategy and authority for people that aren't familiar with human design in general, but it does, I look at type, I look at profile because it's sort of like the who you are and the how how you express that into the world.
Maybe you can give us an outline of all the line numbers, and we'll put the link for this in the show notes, peeps.
Yeah, and it actually kind of flips depending whether it's conscious or subconscious. I wish I had my little cheat sheet in front of me, but essentially like it's going to be things that are very familiar, but the way I have them situated in the report will be a little bit more specific to communications, but it's, as that line one, it's making sure you're giving people the depth of your knowledge. So sometimes line ones are going to want to go out and, write long form content. They may not want to go on a podcast, but maybe they want to write a contributor article for something like that. The line twos, it's like, literally like, what are people coming to you for? Like that you may not even realize that you're good at, and like thinking about those things and being like, oh, well, I don't think that's special, but it must be because people are calling it out of me all the time. Right. Or like what comes most naturally. The three, to me, like even when I have friends that have a line three in their profile, because I actually have helped people write resumes using this information, go and, prepare for job interviews using this information. But I'm like, it's so counterintuitive to walk into a meeting or an interview and talk about the things that went wrong. But better than anybody, like they're the things that people want to hear from you. And so, people want to be buttoned up all the time. But as a line three, I think the most important thing, and you say this more than anybody, is show the messiness, because out of that messiness comes something really valuable, like wisdom that you never would have gained had you not had that experience. And so like I say to people all the time, I'm like, go talk about the project that went wrong, but what you learned from it at the end of the day. And that's what people are going to come to you for. Right.
Yeah.
Line four, I mean, to me, like the line four is just so much about heart too. So it's like, how can you, like, for me, like I want to be the most sincere, authentic version of myself. And the more I can like show my excitement and show how I love to help people and do all of those things, like that to me is very line four. I mean, it's also just about using your, like, we're always going to use our network in some ways, or like look for opportunities to do PR where you feel really comfortable. So like if you have friends that have podcasts, and it doesn't mean you can't go outside of it, but I think that four in sharing, it's like literally like what you've built through your connections is so important. The five, like practicality, like anything, like the steps, like this, these are the steps you can take. Here's exactly what you can do, to get it done. And then the six to me is just this like broad wisdom. Like what have you, there's that element of the three in there because you can talk about those experiences you've had, but like, letting people, I think as the six too, like letting people see your process. Cause I think you also get to a point where you're like, oh no, I'm 48 years old. I should have my shit together. But to me, it's like, I think that's doing people a disservice, because how can you be a role model if you're only showing like where you are and not how you got there and how it continues to be, like to evolve and change. And so to me, it's really, really important for the six. I mean, it can go so much deeper than that. But then, what else do I use? I look at motivation too, because I think for people like that's like also another, I almost say call it the bonus line number, because I think sometimes it gives you just another area to talk about how your work expresses out. So like I have guilt motivation. So for me, it is about giving people practical steps and what to do. So I do have that element of the energy that I like to share with people when I go out and talk about, like, just like we're doing now, like it's giving people the steps that they can take to use PR in their own business wherever they are. Cause I think that is something everyone can do PR. There's opportunity, no matter, whether you have 100 followers or 100,000 followers, there's an audience for you. And I mean, that could look like Instagram lives. It doesn't even have to be podcasts. Like there's so many ways for people to build connections that then they use strategically to get to the next the next step. And then I look at throat gates. So my report has throat gates, motivation, profile lines, and type are the 4. I'd love to expand it, but you know how much work it is to like build out every piece of the elements. But they're probably like 30, most of them are like 30, 35 pages of information. And I've gotten a really good response for people. So they are on my website if anybody ever wants to run their chart and check that out. And then I have a free little starter guide too that goes by type and gives some general overviews on how to, start geting out there using your type as well.
So good. Yeah. So can we just talk about that? We've got a lot of people in startup phase, people that can't afford to, as yet, they're not ready to invest in someone else. What are the little things if they know they need to be patient, they know they need an overarching intention, they know that they need to follow their human design. So are they lit up about it? Is it somewhere they can share their wisdom? Is their urge there, or does it feel good to be there? They've now heard a little bit about the line number. They're kind of armed, but what do they actually do? How do they actually start to build their PR on their own as they're, juggling every other department in their new business that they're building?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the most important thing is to really understand the value that you want to share with an audience. Yeah. So knowing who you're talking to, I mean, it's just key. The most important thing is you want to be as clear as possible. Like, who is your audience? Who can you help? Who are you here to serve? And then, again, like your story is so important. I think podcasts are so powerful because people really get to know you, right? So like someone could hear you on a podcast, someone could hear another human design teacher on a podcast. It doesn't mean you're better or they're better, but they're going to resonate with somebody. And I think when you are in somebody's energy for that period of time, it makes it so much easier to make that decision to work with someone. So I love podcasts for that reason. However, it's really important when you pitch a podcast host or producer, or whoever you're reaching out to make sure you share a little bit of that, but also talk about how that's going to relate to their audience and the value you offer, because it can't be totally self-serving, right? They're serving an audience because they want people to keep coming back. And you know this, obviously, which is why you have such a successful podcast, but you want to offer value to the audience. So I would say like, outline those things first. If you can get that nailed down, it's really just like writing a pitch. So you talk about, why you like their show, what you have to offer their audience, in a nutshell, some talking points that you want to share. And it can be based on things you've heard on their show before that you want to expand on or respond to, or maybe have a different opinion on, something totally different related to your work. And then it's really just like being a nice person and asking and saying, like, I'd love the opportunity for you to consider me. I'd love to hear back from you either way. And I hope we have the opportunity to collaborate. So once you have that pitch down, really go find those shows and feel into the shows that feel great to you, whatever your type is. It needs to feel good. You need to, not look at the size. There's definitely ways to kind of like, try to make sure a show is realistic. And I'm not saying everybody can't pitch the lifestylist, but it's also good to kind of get a sense for the type of guest that the show has and make sure you fit in that category, and then just reach out. It's like you say all the time, is taking imperfect action, and it's just trying it and knowing that you may not get a response. You may get a no, but you may get a yes too. And if you keep at it long enough, you're going to get a yes. And then you're going to start where you are and you're going to build up, and then you use that podcast to leverage to get on the next podcast, and you just kind of keep building. It really is a long game. Yeah. It requires patience. And if you make it fun, like that's what I say, if you take the pressure off, if you're doing it yourself and you make it fun, just think of it as like being able to meet new people. Like that's how I think about it. Like, how do you get to meet new, like, how do I get you to meet somebody else cool that maybe we don't even expect, that then you have this like amazing relationship with? And I mean, that's my line for talking, but at the same time, I think everybody,
I love it. And I love that. Like, because the other thing I want to add to everything that you're saying that's just gold is, for me in the beginning, when I was starting my business, I was networking. I was, everyone that I was training with, I was talking to, I was building relationships, I was having conversations. So it was always about, well, I'll come on your podcast and you come on my podcast. And they mightn't have had many people listen, and neither did I in the beginning. But it was like, I don't care, because I need to practice. I need to practice. I need to, build my experience as not only an interviewer, but as a guest. Mm-hmm. So that would be one thing I would say, like, everyone's starting a business on some level. I mean, if you're in the HDX collective,
go on each other's podcasts.
Exactly.
Right?
We have this amazing community that supports each other. So as you learn together, support each other, be on each other's podcasts. That happens a lot. Like it happens a lot in our team that everyone sort of comes on and shares each other's podcasts, but also in this community. So make sure that you're actually, because I know in the beginning, I think we go straight for the big podcast. Like, how do I get on that podcast? And we forget that we have to start, and you already said it, we have to start where we're at. So where we're at is just getting on any podcast. And as we build the muscle, then things have space to grow and expand.
And I think you also get clarity. Like I find that sometimes people's messages will start to change the more they talk on additional podcasts, because someone asks them a different question and then they think about it in a different way. They're like, oh, maybe that's something that's valuable to other people that I hadn't thought about. So I just think, even if you're not necessarily using it for visibility, I think just even leveraging it to get out there and almost like use it as market research to see what's coming back to you to think about too. And you're also building each other's audiences too. So I would say, like, you mentioned advertising early on, like advertising you can buy. PR for the most part is earned. And what you're doing is you're earning an opportunity to get in front of someone else's audience and hopefully bring them over to yours. And so even if you each have an audience of 100 people and you pick up half of that person's audience, you're increasing by 50%. And that's exponential over time too. And so that's why, like, it's not about, I don't think it's about judging or measuring the size of the opportunity. It's literally building, and they're just building blocks. And you have to think of it as something that you just, you put one block on top of the next. And, before you know it, 2 years later, you're on the Lifestylist, right?
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And I think that, just to say, I think one of the important things that I want to say to those of you that are in that startup phase is, if you just, I think that what you said earlier, Amanda, like also see it as it's a value exchange. There were so many pitches that before, when I was doing this on my own, before I had you, before T was looking at them, people would just send me pictures like, I'm this and I am that, and I want to talk about this and I want to talk about that. And I'm like, I don't care what you want to talk about. What I care about is my audience. And, I've had this feedback about you guys listening, that when I bring on guests, like a lot of my guests, they just, they've been on this podcast, they fly, they have a lot of success, they grow. And, a lot of them become part of my family. I mean, Heather Ivany, Jess Babaco, Elizabeth Ralph, they become a part of this family. So you guys hold me to a standard, that I'm going to have a certain type of guest. And I would say that most podcasters that have a lot of success feel the same way. Like we're very protective. I remember Heather saying to me the first time I had her on the podcast, after the podcast, she's like, wow, you are really protective of your audience. I'm like, of course I am. I don't want to just have like any rando on there.
No, you've worked hard to build it, right? Like it's years and years of work to build that audience. And I think, there's no bigger compliment as a PR person. I've had this happen like a handful of times now. I've had hosts come back to me and say, I never take cold pitches, but this pitch has really demonstrated to me. So I think if everybody can think about that when they pitch a show, or, and again, everyone can focus on some media or articles too, but I'd say podcast is really the logical place to start, just because there's so much opportunity out there. But if you just think about this, like if you were receiving that email and you were the podcast host, like what would it sound like to you? And I think that, it's not about sending out 100 pitches. It's about really understanding a handful of shows and pitching them really thoughtfully and intentionally. And that will always come through.
Yeah.
And the host is going to know whether you did that or not.
100%. 100%. The ones that I always pay attention to are the ones that reference something I've said on the show. It's not the ones that say, yeah, your personal development work is really in line with my message. You've
Yeah,
never even
exactly.
looked at like, you don't know
and
what
it's
you're
okay to say, like, I think we would share a beautiful conversation at the intersection of X and Y, like, but later on. And that's what it is. Like, it really should be about the show. And then the quicker you get to the point of just, they'll be like, I always have this one sort of summary statement, and it'll change with every single show, even if it's similar, but it will always say, would love to provide value to your audience in the area of blah. And like, whatever that looks like, that is what you should be telling them right up front. Like, you're giving them the takeaway before they even make it to what you want to talk about, or your story, or any of that.
There's something else you said that I just want to touch on or respond to, because it's really important, especially in startup phase, but also as you scale the business, because this is our experience, is that when you get out there and you get on the podcast, and especially the podcast, because you tend to get more feedback, like Amanda said, people ask you different questions. There's a lot of people that ask me the same question. So tell me about the 5 types. But when you start to get asked different questions and you get different responses, and people start to contact you from other people's community, but from yours, like this community that you're building, that is your market research. If you don't know who you serve, pay attention to what people ask you. Pay attention to, the DMs that you get, that people share, because this is also helping you really refine that, that avatar, or that person that you serve. And I just met a new entrepreneur the other day. We were having coffee, and he asked me, like, who do you serve? And like, I could tell him who I serve, but there's still part of me that's very aware that it ebbs and changes depending on what you want, especially in HDX. Like, we're always asking, what do you guys want? What do you guys want? What do you guys want? So we teach to our audience. But this is the way, when we stop being self-focused all the time, like, I need to work it out, I need to have the answers, I need to, it's about me. And we actually listen to the people we're already serving, then that's where the big shift happens. So it's always about value exchange. How can I serve others in the way that they want to be served?
And I think even just doing the research is good for people in startup phase too. Like, I just think this could be a good exercise for people in general. And I never really thought about it this way until we just started, like, talking about this in more depth. But I think that, as you start to look at because, everyone's going to have multiple different genres of shows that they probably can fit within, right? Like, I pitch Elizabeth Ruff to a lot of yoga shows just because she has that connection. And so I think the other thing you start to see too is like, oh, wow, like, they're talking about these things. So I kind of feel like even just doing the research to identify a list of podcasts that might be appropriate for you can really open up your eyes to things that you may not have thought of either. And I think if you, just even take the time, maybe you never even, you should send the pitch, but maybe you never even send the pitch. But if you even take enough time to write a pitch and thoughtfully apply your expertise to that show, I think sometimes, like, that's almost a nice roundabout way versus, like, I always hate the blank paper as a generator. Like, instead of just being like, what's my business plan, or what am I offering? I think sometimes thinking about it that way could be a creative way to come up with your business, ideas, just using something else, giving you something else to respond to.
Oh my God, I love that. Oh my goodness, I could talk to you all day, Amanda. So we're going to put all the links in the show notes for the things that you offer, but how can people find you on social media? What's your website?
So my website is curateyoursoul.com. On Instagram, I am curate.your.soul. And as I mentioned on my website, I do have the communications by design reports. If you run your chart, you'll also get like the little freebie. And then I'm working on like a toolkit for people that want to do their own. It's just not ready yet. But if you run your chart and get on my list, I don't send a million emails, I promise. But I'll let people know when it comes out. But I'm working on like a toolkit of all my tips and tricks and like my favorite websites that I use, my email trackers, like how to measure podcasts, like all of that kind of stuff that I think can give people a lot of insight so you don't feel like you're flying so blindly. I do offer strategy sessions for people. So like if you start this process and you are like, I'm a little lost or stuck, I can help people with that. And then if people are looking for a course, I don't teach, even though that's what I thought I was going to do. But in my true line for culture fashion, I have like a great friend and publicist, actually the manifestor that I mentioned earlier, that I've become really close with. She has like the number one, I think, DIY PR course and community for people. It's less than the cost, like less than 1 month of hiring a publicist. And there's ongoing support in the community. So I highly recommend that for people who are looking for a way to really, like those line ones that like, I need a course. I can't just try this. So I'd love to see everybody in the audience get out there and give it a go.
I love it.
No reason not to.
So good. Now I don't know if we've actually officially confirmed this, but I'm just going to put it out there. You're going to teach PR in HDX next year, aren't you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sacral says yes.
Yeah. Sacral says yes. Brilliant. And so like we have all the other teachers in HDX that are so epic, we're definitely going to have Amanda in there teaching PR next year, which will be super, super exciting. So my beautiful friend, thank you so much. It's been so long. I've been meaning to get you on the podcast for forever, but clearly it's divine timing because we've had such an incredible journey together, and it's just beautiful to be able, for this line 3, to be able to reflect on the journey that we've had because it's just been epic. So thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for you for initiating me into this next leg of my journey, because I'm not sure that I would have taken that step. So I love you and I appreciate you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I remember the day that Elizabeth Ralph said to me, so I've been talking to this PR person, and I'm like, I don't want to tell you what to do, but just stop talking to any other PR person and go and talk to Amanda and then go from there. And because you're just amazing and miraculous and beautiful and the best human being. And one of the other things I just love about you, I love that every time I'm on a big podcast or an interview or something in the States and I very, very rarely get nervous, but the ones that do make me a little bit nervous, you're always there to hold my hand. You're just the best. I appreciate you.
Well, I love it. And I love to get to see and hug you and Taylor in person when I have the opportunity. So it is my pleasure.
So good. So good. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us, for listening at home. I trust you got what you needed from today's episode, and I so look forward to having you on the next one. Bye for now. Thanks, everyone, for being here all the way to the end of the podcast. I hope you got lots of value out of it. I certainly had a lot of fun doing it. Could I please ask that you share this podcast with friends if you found it valuable? And also, bonus points, could you leave a review for me as well on Apple? It would be greatly appreciated. If at any point you would like to be on the podcast, or you've got questions that you'd like me to discuss on the podcast, by all means get on my socials and DM me. Everything you need is there in the show notes. Have an awesome day. Bye for now.